And if you're wondering how to get hold of us at Walking Like Jesus Ministries, in your notebook, on the page says Getting to Know Larry and Gladine McCall, toward the bottom, there's our website address, as well as our YouTube channel and my ministry email. So ways to get hold of us that way. And Lord willing, before too long, we're going to see these videos online on the YouTube channel, so we can look forward to that. When our kids were little, they're now in their 40s, 4 or 5 times a year, we would make the journey from our home in Indiana to Pennsylvania to visit our parents, their grandparents. We love being with our parents. The kids love being with their grandparents. So we'd make that journey 4 or 5 times a year, about 8 hours. And we loved being with our parents so much that our tendency was to leave as late as we could in the day. And so instead of saying, let's leave right at breakfast time, we would leave mid-afternoon, often, sliding into late afternoon, which meant that we were getting home well after our kids' bedtime. So what happened as our kids were growing up was that they would tend to go to sleep somewhere around their normal bedtime. In the back of the van, they'd slump over in their seats or lean on one another. And then I would continue to drive in the quiet until we got to a place almost within sight of our home. And I asked our daughter earlier today, do you remember when in the journey I would say this? I would say, "We're almost home, kids. Wake up. Time to get your shoes on." And she named the exact spot, a particular gas station that was the marker. Time to wake up. We're almost home. Get your shoes on. Well, friends, for some of us in this room, we're almost home. It's time to get our shoes on. We ought to be thinking and planning for the end of life. And so this session is called Finishing Well, Preparing for the End of Life. Our prayerful goal in this session is this: to help you prepare spiritually, relationally, and practically for the end of your earthly journey so that we can finish well and leave a godly legacy. So when you think about coming to the end of your earthly journey, what type of feelings come to your heart? You can jot them down if you want. You don't have to share them out loud. You can if you'd like. But when you think about finishing your earthly journey, what are you feeling? Is it fear, uncertainty, or maybe anticipation? The truth of the matter is that you're going to die, and so am I. Unless Jesus comes back first, we're all going to die. Did you ever notice that? The mortality rate is the same here as it is back in our hometown. It's 100%. I mean, we're all going to die. So knowing that, why not prepare for that? Why not prepare in these ways, these practical ways, these spiritual ways, these relational ways? And as believers, we can face the reality of our own mortality with faith. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27, it's real clear, it's real direct. The author of Hebrews writes there, by the Holy Spirit's inspiration, it is appointed to man to die once. So death is certain. You know you're going to die. I know I'm going to die. But we don't know when. We don't know when. The time is uncertain. So where do you think you are in your journey? Now, this is a little awkward question to ask because I just said none of us know when we're going to die. But as I mentioned earlier today, Moses wrote one psalm that we know of, Psalm 90. And that psalm of Moses, in Psalm 90, he mentions in there, he says that the average life is 70 years, or by way of strength, maybe 80. In our current culture here in North America, the average age of death is what? Anybody know for sure? It's like late 70s, 78, 79. It's different for men and women. Women tend to live a little bit longer than men on an average, but let's just say 80. Let's just say 80. So let's just say that average age of death here in our culture is right around 80. So what is midlife and beyond? Help me out here, friends. What's half of 80? 40. A lot of 40-year-olds don't think, yeah, I'm at the halfway mark. I'm middle-aged. But I'm sorry. mathematically, if you've blown out 40 candles, you are probably midlife. So where are you on the journey? If you think about what percentage of your life you've lived, how much of your journey might lay ahead of you in the Lord's normal providence? Now, He treats each of us individually, but in His normal way of doing things, how much of your journey still lies ahead of you? What I found in personal experience is not too many people think about it that way until they're about my age. Until they hit their 70s, they don't think about it that much. But I'm 71 currently, and we've been to funerals lately of people, friends of ours, our age, and you get notifications. Just last week, a pastor friend of mine died at 70, and and he was a friend and a godly pastor for years, and got cancer and died. So, what do you think? Think the Lord might have another 10 years from you, another 15, another 20, maybe. For some, you're thinking maybe not, probably not. For some, it's quite likely that you'll be around for another 10 or 15 or 20 years or maybe more. But the point is, probably all of us in the room have crossed the halfway point. And there's more behind us than there is ahead of us. We've run more laps than we're going to run before we finish our race. So we're moving toward the finish line. How are we going to finish well? Not talking about it, avoiding the subject doesn't do anybody any favors. We're not getting prepared for the end of the shortcoming end of our life, and we're not preparing our family, our spouse, our family, for our departure. And yet we will depart. Unless Jesus comes back, you're going to die, I'm going to die. So how do we die well? How do we finish well? How do we prepare for that? That's what we want to talk about in this session. And the reality is that this does impact marriage. And when I was preparing to write Seasoned Marriage book, just doing some statistics on this subject, looking up when people are often widowed. And not to alarm anybody here, but by age 75, the majority of women are widowed. By 75, 58% of women are widowed. Married women are widowed by the age of 75. 58%. 28% of men are widowed by that point. And of course, it increases sometimes dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years. But, my point is, not only are we faced with our own death, but we've got to think about this whole issue of till death do us part. Now, we got married young. Gladine was 19. I was robbing the cradle. I had to get her when she was still young, so no one else got her. I had just turned 21, so we were young. And in our wedding vows, we said, till death do us part. When you say that as a 19 and 21-year-old, it's just kind of a nice sentiment, right? That's what everyone says. It sounds kind of cute, doesn't it? It sounds serious, But you don't really think about it. But then you get to 70 and you realize what Moses said, 70 by reason of strength 80, and you realize, oh, this isn't just nice sentiment. This is real. This is real till death do us part. And I'm not trying to end this seminar on a downer, but the reality is 99% of the time, one spouse is going to walk the other spouse to the door of heaven. It's really rare for a couple to die together, unless they're in a car accident or something. So nearly all of us are going to be faced with that reality that one of us is going to walk the other to heaven's door. How do we prepare for that? How do we prepare for our own departure? How do we prepare our spouse for our departure? And how do we help our spouse realize his or her departure? There's all these issues that we know are going to happen. We know they're going to happen. And yet we tend to avoid the subject. We don't want people to be sad. We don't want people to feel awkward. And so we tend to avoid the subject. And yet the odd thing is, this is going to happen to all of us. So it's not like it could happen, it might happen. Years ago when I was getting a life insurance policy, our agent, who was a believer, is a believer, He was trying to sell us a policy. You know, insurance men learn to read upside down. Do you ever notice that? They have the contract facing you, and they have their pencil on the paper, you know. And our agent kept saying, now, Larry, if something happens to you, and I finally stopped him, and I said, Gary, you can say, Larry, when you die. That's what you mean. I'm okay with that. You can say, now, Larry, when you die. And he said, okay. 5 minutes later, now, Larry, if something happens to you, what is this if stuff? If something happens to you, what is that about? I mean, it's when you die. So death is a reality, even though we don't know when. The timing is uncertain. The reality is, though, that we will die. So why avoid the subject? What holds us back? Any of you want to comment on that? What holds us back from talking about our own departure? Fear of leaving others behind. That's a big one, isn't it? I appreciate that, brother. Yeah, fear of leaving others behind. We don't want them to be sad. We're not overly morbid or anything, but I mention to our grandkids now and then, you know, when we're gone or as long as the Lord has us here, we want to help your parents guide you onto adulthood. And one granddaughter in particular says, don't talk that way, Papa, don't talk that way. And I've said to her, sweetheart, it's going to happen, you know, and it might not happen for a long time, but we don't know that. And so to put it in the context of reality, not hypothetical. Fear of how it's going to impact our survivors. Fear of the unknown. How are we going to die? What's it going to be like? I think as Christians, it's not so much death we fear as the process of dying. You know, is it going to be painful? Am I going to lose my mental capacities? Am I going to be a drain on my family? And we think of all these scenarios. I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. Well, we don't have a lot of say in that, do we? So where do we start? I think if you're struggling, if you really are struggling, and we all do at times, thinking through our own departure, why not start with prayer and just say, Lord, help us. Help us think through this reality that we're living in a fallen world. Help us to understand how you want us to prepare for what's coming. And so there are practical things we can do in preparing. And these are in the book. These are in your outline. They're practical preparations we can make in organizing our affairs. And I'm not what do they call that? I'm not an elder law expert, so if you want to ask questions later, that's fine, but I'm not going to speak beyond my knowledge. But I know, and maybe you are aware as well, maybe you've been an executor for a parent or someone and you've been through this and you can add to our conversation. But there are practical things we can do in preparation for our own deaths. And some of those are just documents. And I list some there, like, for instance, personal records. And from what I've read, I think there's several things to keep in mind. If you need to jot some of these notes down for yourself and your spouse, go ahead and do that. But I think it's good to have your personal records, a hard copy, maybe in a lock box, a fireproof box or something that would survive a house fire, you know. But it'd be good to have them electronically too. We can do that these days, scan them, whatever. But we have our personal documents and other legal documents in a couple of forms, paper form, electronic form. But then what else are you going to do with that? Well, it has to be put somewhere that can be found, right? If you're a piler more than a filer, you need to change, at least on this, you know, and put them someplace that they can be found. And then also you need to tell people that could survive you where you put them. So your spouse, you have an executor chosen from among your kids, or maybe you want to tell all your kids, whatever you decide, but you want to have your documents in form that can survive you. You want to have them in a place where they'll be safe, easily found. You want your survivors to know how to find those documents. And personal documents, there are so many things like birth certificate, or at least copies of these things, birth certificates, marriage license. If you've been through a divorce, is that going to impact your estate? Is that in there? Were you in the military? Are there benefits that come to your survivors because of that? Is that in there? You have copies of things like your Social Security card, your driver's license. One thing I didn't realize till the first of our parents died was, at least where we grew up in Pennsylvania, when you fill out the death certificate for someone else, you have to know where their parents were born. what their names are, your deceased parents' names, places of birth. And some of you know that just off the top of your head. Oh, I know where my grandparents were born and I know their names. If you're doing it for your dad or mom when they died. But if you don't know that, it'd be good to find out or we could pass that news along, that information along if we're the ones who know it. But just do some exploring. And if you don't know for sure, do a Google search and see what you need to know. Are there any personal memorabilia you just want to stay in the family? A letter that grandpa wrote to grandma when he was in World War II or something, that you say, this is precious. We want this to stay in the family. Is there something special to your family? Say, let's pass this down. So look for those things. There's legal documents. Do you have a will? Do you have a trust? Who's your power of attorney? Do you have a living will? Are there deeds to property that you own? There's just legal documents that you want to assemble too. And rather than just saying, oh, the kids will figure this out, they might not appreciate that. So do what you can with your documents, getting them in order and making sure they know where it is. Financial documents, what are the various accounts you have? This is something I need to work on. What are the passwords? And do your survivors know where the passwords are? Do they have access to them? Are there life insurance policies, real estate documents, tax records? Just think through things like that. Legal documents and financial documents, that those are in there too. Are there any medical records that your survivors need to know about? Maybe health issues that could be transferred from generation to generation. Is there anything genetically that your survivors might be benefited in knowing? You assemble those things as well. How about funeral and burial plans? Have you thought through your own funeral? Do you own cemetery plots? Does your family know where those are? Have you already picked out a grave marker? Do they know about that? Just think through what happens. And if you actually are an executor for someone else who's deceased, think about your dying and how can you return a favor now to the coming generation of being organized, of having those documents assembled in a safe place, easily found, and your survivors, especially your executor, and what do they call that? The power of attorney, but I'm thinking like a secondary executor if the first person dies first. You know what I'm saying? But find out who needs those documents and make sure they know what's going on. So on your outline there are places, little boxes, you can check off what you've already done. So what have you checked off there? And what do you need to take care of? You might want to make a note on that. Is there something maybe you should work on pretty soon? So getting your documents in order that way. So that's one thing we do in preparing for our own death is just getting our personal records in order and trying to make it easier for the coming generations. This isn't the main point, but when my parents were nearing the end of their journey, they moved from the house where they raised us 5 kids into a little senior citizen apartment. And we had to go through all their stuff. And they were depression children, right? And some of you are laughing because you had relatives that were depression children, and they saved everything because you never know when you might need it. And we got rid of so much stuff. And my parents were still living, and they were approving of this, but they lived kind of out in the country, and so we had a burn pit going, and I'm carrying one load out to the burn pit, and our one daughter was coming back in for another load, and she stopped me at the halfway point and looked at me and said with intensity, it was your sister, she said with intensity, "Dad, don't do this to us." And I said, naively, "Don't do what?" I knew exactly what she meant. And so, I'm even thinking now, I get a breather here. Over the winter, I'm not traveling as much. Do I need to spend some time just even in my own office at home, getting rid of files and files of stuff that aren't going to be useful to other people, and start taking care of things like that while we still have our physical and mental ability to process things. So all I'm saying is I'm not saying, get morbidly obsessed, but be realistic. especially, you get a little further on in life, to say, we need to start taking care of these things so we're not just burdening our kids with all these things. And the Lord could call any of us home suddenly, and we haven't had time to do that. But, as we have time and ability to go ahead and prepare for our own demise. But I think more important than just taking care of our stuff, our documents, is we want to prepare our own hearts. And when you talk about death, I think 2 or 3 things to be realistic, biblically realistic. And one is that one reason we shy away from the subject of death that hasn't really come up yet is that death is an enemy. And, sometimes Christians want to sound spiritual by minimizing death. I'm like, it's no big deal, we just go to heaven, No, death is an enemy. Death feels weird. It's just wrong. And we feel that way. I mean, just this week, after our worship service at our church on Sunday, 2 men in our church lost their spouses in the last couple of weeks. 2 men were widowed in our church in the last couple of weeks. And the one was very recent. Like, the worship service was like 3 days after his wife died. She was a longtime friend of ours, his wife. We've known her for 50 years. And just before he came up here, helped with her funeral. And talking to her husband, and he loved his wife, and crying with him and holding him and talking to him about the hope of eternity. Going across the room, like 3 minutes later, going across the room and talking to the other man who was also a recent widower. And hearing his heart, that he said to me, not a real emotive man, but he said, I was in maintenance my whole life. He was a man who worked with his hands. He said, I could fix anything, but I couldn't fix my wife. And he started to cry. And I said, well, brother, no, you couldn't, but we know who can and who has. But realizing that we need to prepare for death because it's coming. We need to prepare our hearts, and it feels wrong because it is wrong. If there never was sin, there would never be death. And so every time someone dies, it's a reminder that death has infiltrated the human race. And it was never designed that way at the beginning. Death infiltrated, and death came to all men because all men sin. And so we don't embrace death as if this is great. No, it's not. It's sad. It's an enemy, and the good news is, though, that Christ has defeated its sting through the resurrection and his promise that we too will rise on the great day. So death is an enemy, but we find assurance that Christ has defeated death. And so I love the term that the Puritan John Owen talked about. He called the death of death and the death of Christ. Think about that. The death of death and the death of Christ. That Jesus Christ died to pay the penalty for our sin and then rose again as proof that what he did, living proof, that what he did worked. It was effectual. And his resurrection is proof that what he did on the cross for our sake was the defeat of sin and death, and that we too will rise on that great day. And so death is an enemy. We don't celebrate it. We don't embrace it as a friend. It is an enemy. And yet we respond to it with the hope of the resurrection in Jesus Christ. We too will rise one day. And I think we prepare our hearts by reminding ourselves it's not wrong to grieve over death. And yet our grief is marinated in the hope of the resurrection, so that we know that he's coming back and we too will rise from the dead in our new physical bodies, our immortal bodies. And so we remind ourselves of that, and we help prepare our hearts. It's good for us to remind ourselves, too, a truth found in Psalm 139, verse 16, is that God has ordained all of our days before one of them came to be. In other words, you and I will die right on schedule. Do you ever think about that? You're not going to die a day too soon. You're not going to die a day too late. You're going to die, and so am I, right on schedule. It's just we don't have a copy of the schedule. But God does. It alludes to the fact in that psalm, it's like God wrote them in his book. And he has my lifespan, my death date already in his book. And yours as well. And remembering his sovereign plan is comforting. To know that he's on schedule. And he's not obligated to tell me his schedule. But my lifespan is exactly as long as he's determined it. and to find comfort in that He's in charge. It's not happenstance. And so to assure our hearts this way, that Christ has risen from the dead, He is my death plan. And then we also preach the gospel to ourselves. What do I mean by that? We preach the gospel to ourselves, reminding ourselves that we don't need to dread what's on the other side of our death. And you talk to, if you are a gospelizer, if you tend to witness to other people and you say to people, are you going to heaven, or do you think you're going to heaven? What's one of the most common responses you get when you ask people that? I sure hope so. I sure hope so. And you say, well, that's interesting. You sure hope so. Why do you hope so? Well, I think I've lived a pretty good life. I know a lot of people that are a lot worse than I am. And so when people say that, you know what I like to ask? That's interesting. How good do you have to be good enough for God? How good do you have to be good enough for God? That usually sets them back a little bit. You have to be perfect. Are you perfect? No. So where are you going to find hope? You need to find hope that someone's good in your place. You need to find someone who's going to be good in your place, a substitute. And that's where the gospel comes in. And if we're believers in Jesus Christ, then we preach the gospel to ourselves. Remind ourselves of what Christ has done on our behalf. And because He's died for us, we don't need to fear what's on the other side of our death, because we know we already know He'll welcome us because of what Christ has done in our place. He died, He rose again, and we are in Him. So if you're wrestling with the thought of your own death, I would encourage you to pray, even to pray silently. Lord, prepare my heart to meet You with joy and trust. Remove the fear. Fill me with peace. But I think maybe even more challenging than preparing our own hearts is preparing the hearts of our spouse, our family. When I was preparing this, it struck me that there's like 3 circles of care. And the first one is probably the most precious one, the most soul-searching one. How do we prepare our spouse's heart for our death? As hard as dying might be on us as the one dying, it's even harder for the one, our spouse that outlives us. Because our surviving spouse's grief will go longer than ours. Ours will be ended the moment we see Christ. Or our spouse might grieve for a good while, might grieve for a long time after our death. It's hard to say goodbye to your closest friend, your lover, your spouse that you promised your covenant love till death do us part. And the ache of the surviving spouse can be beyond words. Some of you have been there. Some of you lost a spouse already and you're married again. Some of us, that's ahead of us yet. But that would be especially challenging to think about the spouse who's going to outlive us. How can I prepare her heart? How can I prepare his heart? Some of us are going to die suddenly. We're not going to have a lot of advance notice. Maybe in an accident or a sudden stroke or heart attack. And it happens. But sometimes we have, what should I say, a heads up that it's coming. Or maybe we've gotten a diagnosis from the doctor that we don't have much longer to live. Our pastor friend that just died earlier, last week I guess it was, he had some advance notice. And he and his wife actually video recorded part of their story. We watched it the other night. Recorded part of their story for their kids and grandkids. So he knew he wouldn't be living much longer. And he used the time he had left to help prepare the heart of his wife, the heart of his kids, his grandkids. What a gracious gift that was. So if you know, or at least have a pretty good idea that your journey is soon to be ended, how do you prepare your spouse for your departure? Some thoughts here. I would say express love. Through your words, your actions, express love. Hugs, kisses, touch, preparing for caring for tasks that were normally your responsibility. I mean, I think we all understand the touch, the hugs, the kisses, but what do I mean by preparing your spouse for the things that you used to always do? When we were in college, one of our professors got cancer and knew he was about to die. And he was such a tender man. There were tasks he always did around his house that his wife never did. And he put Post-it notes around the house. Here's how you change the water softener filter. Here's how you do this. And he actually left notes for his wife about how to do things that she wasn't used to doing. And when he told us that, and he was still living when he told us that, when he told us that, that's really strange. And then I got older and I thought, that was really kind that he was helping her. And so if you know there's certain things your spouse doesn't do and you know how to do, what could you do in that situation? You could inform them, this is how you do this is how you do that. Or you could find someone else to do it so your spouse doesn't have to worry about it. Maybe your wife never mows and you're the guy and you're dying. And your wife never mows, you always take care of the mowing. Say, you know what, honey, feel free to spend the money to hire someone to mow. Or, you know what, our grandson could come over and mow that for us. Whatever. But you're thinking ahead. I think especially for us men, if we're dying first. And that's the Lord's normal providence. They're wanting to care for our wives and not leave them in situations where they're at a loss. Like, what do I do? We had a relative die a few years ago who died very suddenly. And his wife was left with, I don't know how to do a lot of stuff. And there were a lot of stuff she didn't know what to do. Thankfully, family and friends came around her and helped her work through so many issues that she had no idea what to do. And I'm not blaming him. He didn't know he was going to die suddenly in his early 60s, but he did. But caring, I think especially for men who want to care for their wives after his departure, is think through what's life going to be like for her after I die. And if there's something you could do, or reassure her, it's okay to spend money to hire someone to do this or that, or you know what, if this house is too much for you to care for, it's okay to sell it and move into an apartment or something, and just reassure her that you're thinking of her life without you, and you're loving her that way. Express love that way. I think express gratitude. Express gratitude on a deeper level than usual. It's wonderful to say thank you for those little things she does in life or he does in life. But if you know your departure is arriving soon, go deeper than that. Maybe say something like this: sweetheart, thank you for walking with me through life's journey. I'm so glad the Lord brought us together. There's no one else I'd rather have beside me all these years. You've been such an amazing blessing to me over the years. I'm so glad you've been my spouse. And you express gratitude on a deeper level, something that'll stick. And maybe you'll even want to put that in writing or video it or something. Express praise and how much you value them. What have you seen God doing in your spouse? How have you seen God using your spouse? That you're honoring the Lord by pointing out, I've seen God use you this way. And you're building up your spouse to remind him of God's work in his or her life. And then just offering spiritual assurance. Spiritual assurance. What I mean by that is it's difficult for the surviving spouse to realize, was our friend told me on Sunday I couldn't fix my wife. But I think another dynamic is, as I said earlier, we can walk our spouse to the door of heaven, but we can't walk them through. We can walk them to the door, but we can't walk them through. I think sometimes a surviving spouse can feel like, I wanted to always be with you, but now I have to say goodbye on this side of heaven. And if you know your spouse is going to struggle with that, to remind them, sweetheart, I just want you to know that I'm going to have to say goodbye to you here at the door. But I'm not going to be alone, because he promised never to leave us or forsake us. And he will hold me fast. He will walk me through the gate. I'll be okay, sweetheart. He'll be with me. And to reassure your spouse, it's okay. And so we can express love to our spouse in those ways. Words of assurance, words of thanks, praise. But I think another sphere of preparing for our own demise, finishing our journey well is preparing the hearts of our family, our kids, our grandkids. It's similar to our spouse, but there's different nuances. And so it'd be similar in the heart attitude. How do we talk to our kids, our grandkids? And I think sometimes, especially if we are sick, really sick in our latter days, and most of the conversations tend to gravitate around our health. How you doing today, Dad? Well, it's been some pain, but it's not as bad as yesterday. And we're talking about all the health issues. Doctor said this, and it's okay to talk about those things, but I'm not there yet. But when I get there, if I'm there, if I know I'm dying, I want to go deeper than that. I don't want to just talk to the kids and grandkids about the medical issues and stuff like that, but I want to speak on a deeper level. I want to express love and gratitude. If there's things I need to make right with one of the kids or grandkids, to confess that, to seek forgiveness. If there's things I want to encourage them in, praise them in, to make sure I say that, even write it down. And one thing we're realizing, ministering to other grandparents, is how many of our grandkids know our personal testimony of salvation? Do the grandkids know our story? This is how God saved me. And I think it'd be wonderful when we're preparing for that last day to make sure our family hears the story of God's grace to us. Maybe you need to write it down, or maybe you want to video record it. But that our survivors, our successors, know the story of God's grace to us. And when we're gone, they could pass it on yet to another generation. Did I ever tell you the story of God's grace to my grandpa? And they're able to tell the story. That God did this in my grandpa's life. And you're telling these stories of God's greatness and grace to the coming generation so that they would set their hope in God. That's what it says in Psalm 78. But I think another thing we could do for our family members, our kids and our grandkids, is to have what's called a spiritual will. We know what a will is, what's going to happen to all of our stuff. And that's important. They need to know what's supposed to happen to our stuff, so they don't have to make all those decisions on their own. Or a lot of families, they get divided over stuff. But if you spell it out, that helps keep people together. But why not write a spiritual will? That you're not just wanting to leave them stuff, you're wanting to leave them a legacy of faith. And so you write down the story of God's grace and your wishes that they too would put their faith in Jesus Christ, and that they would follow him with all their heart and find their joy in him. That you write that down for them so they know that's what matters. That's what matters more than who gets the TV. Is the story of God's grace, the spiritual will. And then another consideration, I think this is particularly for us men, and I base this on 1 Timothy 5. In 1 Timothy 5, verses 3 and 4, it says that family members should take care of the widows. If a widow has no family to care for, then the church needs to come around her. But if a widow has family, the family should be caring for the widow. That's God's design. And we're living in a culture where they assume the government's going to take care of everybody. Well, the government might help if it's needed, but why isn't the family there on the front line saying, we want to help mom, we want to help grandma? And I think for us men, if we know we're preceding our wife in death, or it's pretty sure we're preceding our wife in death, that we have a friendly, loving heart-to-heart with our kids, our grandkids, saying, look after your mom. Look after your mom. I've loved her, I've loved my wife, I've loved your mother, I've loved your grandma, but I'm going to be leaving. Look after her. And it's like a charge, a loving charge to the coming generations. Look after her. That the family owns that. And I'm sure a wife could say that about the husband, if he's going to outlive her. But I think especially 1 Timothy 5, taking care of the ladies in our life. So if this is an exercise you can do later, unless you want to jot down some thoughts now. If you have some thoughts right now, the Lord's stirring thoughts in your mind, why didn't you jot them down somewhere? And I want to make sure I talk to my kids, my grandkids, my spouse, these things, jot down things that you can bring back later and flesh out. And then lastly, how do we glorify God in our death? And that's a subject I never really thought about that much till I was writing the book, Seasoned Marriage. When I was reading in John 21, where the Apostle John is writing about the resurrected Jesus. Remember, he stayed on the earth for 40 days after he came back to life. And in those 40 days, he was up on the north side of the lake, up there in Galilee, and he had some private conversations with his guys. And one of his private conversations was with Peter. Peter, remember, denied Jesus 3 times. And if you read John's account of that, 3 times Jesus asked Peter, what? Do you love me? Lord, you know I love you. Feed my sheep. Care for my sheep. You hear the heart of Jesus there. Care for my sheep. But then John says something. He's talking about Peter, and Peter wanted to know how John was going to die, and Jesus basically said, that's none of your business, Peter. But then he said something to Peter about how he was going to die, and Jesus said, he said this indicating by what death Peter would die. And I just thought, how he would glorify God in his death. I forget exactly how it's worded right now. But the point was, I'm reading that thinking, there must be a way we can glorify God in our death. How do we die? How do we die in a way that glorifies God? There must be, because John mentions it there, that we can glorify God in our death. And as I thought about it, I came up with these thoughts. That if we're going to glorify God in our death, then we need to look back at our lives with gratitude. We look back not complaining, but we look back with gratitude. God, thank you for what you've done in my life. Thank you for calling me to yourself in grace. Lord, thank you for giving me my spouse. Thank you for our family. Thank you for our friends. Thank you for our church. Thank you for what you've done in our lives. You look back with gratitude. You look at the present with trust. Isaiah 46:4 says, even to your old age, I am he. And to gray hairs, I will carry you. And so even in our latter days, we look at the present of our latter days, and we say, Heavenly Father, thank you for carrying me through the valley of the shadow of death. That we look at the present with trust, and then we look forward with hope. We look forward with hope, that we know that one day we will see his face. Our church has a number of widows, but it seems to me we have a disproportionate number of widowers. And I've talked to a number of these guys, and one of the men whose wife died probably close to 10 years ago now, they were both, husband and wife, are longtime friends of ours, one of the early members of our church. And I asked him, how are you doing, some years later with your grief of losing your wife? And he said, Larry, it's not that I don't miss her, I do, but I've noticed there's been a metamorphosis in my heart where my grief has been gradually changing to anticipation. And he says, I'm anticipating. I'm anticipating seeing the Savior's face. I'm looking forward to seeing my wife's face. Anticipation. And I think as we face our death, that also we die glorifying God whenever we look forward with hope, knowing that our death, our demise is not the last chapter, that there will be spiritual life in heaven. Then when Jesus comes back, there will be a physical resurrection, and we will have a new heaven and new earth where we will live forever with him. He will be our God. We will be his people. One of my favorite phrases in the Bible is in the last chapter of the Bible. Revelation chapter 22, verse 4 says, they will see his face. They will see his face. And friends, that is going to be the heaven of heavens. That's the heaven of heavens. They will see his face. They will see him. He will be our God. We will be his people. And so we encourage our hearts that way. We die looking back with gratitude, look at the present with trust. We look forward with hope. So I want to encourage you to do 2 things, maybe this week, maybe even this week. Work on one of those tangible steps, documents or whatever you're going to do, but then also think through relational, spiritual steps. What could you do to prepare your own heart? What could you do to prepare the heart of your spouse, your family members, so that you can serve them in preparing for your demise and even your spouse's demise? So we've talked in this session about preparing practically, documents, plans, relationally, how do we prepare our spouse and our family, spiritually, how do we prepare our hearts before God, and doing that, preparing for our own death, is an act of love for our family members, particularly our spouse. So let me ask Pastor Josh if he'll come, and I'll tell you, we're doing Q&A first, aren't we? It is. Let's do some Q&A. So this will end our teaching time today, but we'll just open it up for you. If there's things you want to talk about this session, finishing well, the session right before this, flourishing, not marital monotony. Before that, embracing change. And then the first session this morning, I'm working backwards here, but that first session is, why did we get married in the first place? What is the whole purpose of marriage? So your questions, comments, thoughts?
I just have a comment. I want to thank you for presenting today. It's been emotional for me.
Yeah.
I thank you.
You're welcome, Paul, and it's been a delight to be with you again. Yeah.
So, question. A friend of ours in church has lost her husband, and they didn't have any children, and they were just close. And she doesn't seem to be able to get over her grief. She's just pining for that time when she can get to heaven and be with Robert again. It's my understanding there won't be marriage in heaven. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes.
Okay, so what in your opinion, will the relationships that we share with those that we're looking forward to being with, what would you think that relationship would look like? Or is that just going to pale when we're before God?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is I don't know. But I will say this. Jesus said there was not marriage or the giving of marriage in heaven. And on one hand, he might be just referring to the spiritual realm. I mean, a lot of Christians forget that after we die, if Jesus hasn't come back yet, after he dies, our spirits go to be with the Lord in heaven, and we're with him in spirit form, not body form. And I heard so many people talk when someone dies having had some debilitating disease, their bodies are whole now. And I never correct them, that's not the time. But inside I'm thinking, not yet, not yet. We don't get new bodies till Jesus comes back. And so when 2 Corinthians 5, look it up, 2 Corinthians 5, absent with the body, present with the Lord. And so when we die before Jesus comes back, our spirits go to be with him in heaven. And so there's no marriage or giving in marriage there. We're not physical. But eternity is going to be physical. When Jesus comes back, there's a great resurrection. We get new bodies. The mortal shall put on immortality. The perishable shall put on imperishable. What's it going to be like then? I don't know. But I read the end of Isaiah, the end of 2 Peter, and the end of Revelation. The last two chapters of Isaiah, last two chapters of 2 Peter, and the last two chapters of Revelation. And there's comments of physicality. So I don't know that it's going to be marriage to the same person. I don't think so. Jesus was challenged by the Sadducees who didn't even believe in the resurrection. They were just trying to trip him up. What about the lady who kept marrying the brothers, Levirate marriage? The brother was supposed to take the wife of the deceased brother. Did I say that right? You know what I meant. What if that happened 6 or 7 times? Whose wife is she in eternity? Jesus said, you don't get it. There's not marriage or giving in marriage in heaven. And John Piper said something in one of his books that makes sense to me. I forget what book it was, but he said, if we love our marriages now, we love our spouses now, and we think, how can heaven be heaven if we're not married to each other? That's not going to be good. Well, whatever it's going to be, whatever our relationship's going to be then, it's going to be better. I mean, marriage now points forward, and you think about that. I mean, even in Ephesians 5, I didn't talk about that today, but I'll take a few minutes now. In Ephesians 5, where it talks about Christ loving his bride and rubbing the blemishes out and washing us in order to present her spotless, that's wedding language. Presenting. I got to walk this lady down the aisle 21 years ago. 21 years ago, walked this lady down the aisle, and I presented her to her groom. And I said something like, here's your bride. Take good care of her. I did the same with her sister, walking her down the aisle. I presented our daughter to the groom. And it's that, not exactly the same, but it's that kind of language where we present. And the bride of Christ, the church, Christ, even though he's the groom, he's presenting us for that great day. Revelation 19, the wedding feast of the Lamb. He's preparing his own bride for that day. And so our marriages are pointing forward to a greater marriage. Our marriages are pointing to that love story. And we get to be part of the story. And so whatever it is, whatever we experience then, we know, even though we haven't experienced it yet, it's going to be better. So rather than thinking, oh, shucks, I feel so bad I'm not going to have my spouse in heaven. Well, maybe not, but the point is, whatever relationship we have then, it's going to be even better than now because there's not going to be any sin. There's not going to be any effects of sin. There's going to be wholeness, shalom. Everything's going to be whole. Everything's going to be right. The love we have for one another is not going to be the same, but it's going to be better. It's going to be pure. So I think we ought to look forward with anticipation that whatever we experience then, it's going to be better. But if any of you want to add to that, I'm more than glad to learn from you. But I've wondered the same thing because, I love being married to this lady.
The best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come. Thank you, Gladys. Good question. That's a deep question. And it's very pertinent to thinking about finishing our race. Questions, comments? Tanya.
In marriage, not necessarily between one another, walking through your spouse as they lose a parent, a sibling, going through the loss of a child, or a major job loss, or the change of retirement. There's grief in seasons of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that a little, on how we can help support our spouse
Yeah.
through those seasons of change?
Yeah. Boy, thanks for asking, Tanya. Yeah, how do we walk with our spouse through times of grief? Not just our own death, but death of a parent, sibling, child, significant loss of a job, loss of a ministry position, something like that. Just there's different kinds of grief. Well, I think we need to remember what the Word of God says about weep with those who weep. And some of us are not as emotive as other people, and I think we ought not to dismiss ourselves, excuse ourselves, like, well, I'm just not an emotional person. It doesn't say if you're an emotional person, grieve with those who grieve, weep with those who weep. It just says weep with those who weep. And I think we need to share in the pain of whatever they're going through and not just minimize it and give platitudes. We're willing to cry with people that are crying. But then when it's appropriate, to begin to breathe in words of hope, of God's love, God's care, what the Lord will one day do of making all the wrongs right. And some things are really painful. A non-Christian dies in the family, and you can't ease the pain by saying, oh, he's in heaven now, when you don't know that. We don't have a photocopy of the Book of Life, so we don't say absolutely he's not. We don't say absolutely he is. If there's no evidence that he's ever professed faith in Christ, no evidence of marks of grace in his or her life, then what I've told people in that situation when they ask me, is he in heaven? Say, let's leave that in the hands of our God. And we can trust him with that. And not like, I have a photocopy of the Book of Life, because we don't. But it is, we've lost all four of our parents, and some of you have done the same. And we actually were close to all of our parents. We loved each other's parents. And so Gladys' mom and dad died. She was grieving. I was grieving too. We grieved together. We both loved our parents. And so you grieve with the person, but then I think as much as we can, we give reminders of hope in Christ, anticipating the day. I wouldn't go there so quickly that we're missing the grief, but when it's appropriate, begin to breathe words of hope. And I'm sure there's more, Tanya, that I'm not thinking, but hopefully that gets us started. Do you have other thoughts? Either of you?
I think what you said, being emotionally available and sensitive,
Yeah.
empathetic.
Yeah.
There is certainly a time to share with them the truth of things.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're in heaven or
Yeah.
not. There'll be a time for that conversation
Yeah.
at a deeper level.
Yeah.
But in the moment, speaking the truth at the wrong time is no good.
Yeah.
And that's what
Timing your comments, that's good, Kurt. Yeah, and I think those of us that are fix-it people, especially if we're fix-it people and not real emotive, we need to remind ourselves maybe a little more strongly, you can hold that comment till later. It's not timing. It's not the right time yet. Yeah. Other questions, comments, any part of the day? Yeah, Carol.
There was a really good book and audio series that I listened to after I lost Mark suddenly when we were walking together. And it was Erwin Lutzer.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book 1 minute after you die.
Yeah.
But he also did an audio series. And I would put that tape in the car, drive to Grand Rapids, go to Meyer Gardens and walk around. And it really helped me with part of the grieving process.
Okay.
Know that God is sovereign.
Yeah.
He is sovereign. It's His time. And we're His child. He wasn't mine. I enjoyed him for 40 years, but he was God.
Yeah.
And when he wants to, he calls us home.
Yes.
It just really, really helped me to listen to those. And through the early part of my grieving process.
Thank you for sharing that. Erwin Lutzer, the minute after, minute after you die. Yeah. Okay.
And they have them through Moody Media.
Moody Media. Okay, that's a good resource. Randy Elkhorn's book on heaven is amazingly helpful. There's probably some other resources aren't coming to mind right now, but there's good resources out there to prepare our own hearts and to help prepare other people's hearts too. Thanks for sharing that. Anything else? Pastor Josh.
Question, Larry, and it's been kind of something that I've been working through, going back to the third session, in regards to confession being important. I know, I think there's a propensity in our own flesh that confession means saying I'm sorry. I said I'm sorry. Can we move on? And you were starting to even go down the what a biblical, practical confession looks like.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? Because
Okay.
I think that would be encouraging for those of us that want to move past maybe the guilt, the shame
Yeah.
that we're feeling, or
Yeah.
to maybe just move past any
Yeah.
hurt that we might have caused our spouse.
Thanks for asking, Josh. Two words that come to my mind in confessing sin are the words free and full. Free in the sense there's no contingencies, there's no asterisks, but what about you? It's free. I mean, I'm confessing this sin to you openly, no pressure on you to reciprocate. I'm asking you to forgive me, but I'm not pressuring you to forgive me. And so it's free, but it's also full. You're not holding back, you're not tempering your confession. I'm sorry I got angry with you, but I have a headache. Sorry I was angry with you, but it's just been a stressful day. That's not full, that's not free. That's has all these contingencies. But to confess without reservation, without excuses, without blaming someone else or something else, full and free. And if you're confessing your sin to the marital monotony or anything like that, I was talking to someone else just recently about a subject, about this issue, and the phrase I came up with was, "You don't have cards to play." I mean, you're not saying, "But I have this reason, and you did that," and we're putting all these other cards to spread out the blame or make them feel guilty too or something. But I'm just freely confessing my sin, my contribution to the problem, and I'm asking you to forgive me if you would. I'm not pressuring you to, I'm asking you to. And and then to accept that when it's given, and not pressure to have reciprocity. If it comes, praise God, but you're not going to squeeze that out of your spouse. Pardon me?
Acknowledging what I did wrong and how I hurt you and how I want to change.
That's good. Gladine added, not only acknowledging what we did to hurt you, but then acknowledging a desire to change. By God's grace, I want to change this. I'm asking God to help me do this or that. Yeah, and we all do sin against our spouse. You know, the reality of the Christian life, not just marriage, the reality of the Christian life is we are all sinners and we're all sinned against. Those are both true. I sin and I'm sinned against. And when you think about that in marriage, what we tend to gravitate to is how I've been sinned against. My spouse sinned against me by doing this, by not doing that. And if we get so focused on being sinned against, we're always the victim. I'm the victim. I'm the victim. My spouse didn't treat me right. My spouse didn't do this. My spouse did that. And we're always portraying ourselves as a victim. I didn't do anything wrong. It's you. And if we play the victim, there's never change. Because if you're the victim, life's just happening to you. You're not responsible. But if we own our sin and we realize our agency, that I'm responsible for my sin, and I confess my sin, now because I'm understanding the fact that I'm not only sinned against, we can talk about that some other time, but I'm a sinner. I've sinned against my spouse. Now that makes me lean into God's grace to find His forgiveness and to find His help in changing. And so if you have a tendency to see yourself as nearly all the time, if maybe all the time, seeing yourself as the victim of your spouse, you're probably not going to see change in your life. But if you, by God's grace, own your own sin and say, I contributed to our problems in this way or that way. And we're not talking about what my spouse did right now. I'm just saying, I contributed to our problems in this way or that way. Now that invites God's grace, and that invites change. And you can contribute to the change in your marriage if you own your own sin. So that's a huge part of seeing marriages that are drifted apart coming back together and enjoy the Lord's grace together again. I keep making for the steps, but I'll tell you what. Why don't we have Josh come up and I'll hang out if you want to talk more.
Yeah, I was going to say Larry and Gladine will make themselves available, but it's a loaded question. I've been so helped by this information. I hope this has been refreshing, helpful to you, whatever season of life you've been in. There are several people that I want to thank. First of all, Larry and Gladine, thank you guys for giving of your time to come and serve us. And I've known Larry for many years, first as my potential father-in-law, but even at the same time as my pastor. And Larry and Gladine, in this last decade of life, they've been able to travel and to do conferences, seminars like this. And I'm so glad because you can tell, you can hear and see that Larry he's a born shepherd. He loves to shepherd people. And I'm so thankful that God has him sharing his shepherding heart. And you've shepherded us well. You've served us well, Gladine, as well. So thank you for giving us biblical, practical wisdom, and most of all, for pointing us to Christ. Want to say thank you to you guys for being here. I would encourage you. My mother-in-law just reminded me of this, of how easy it is for us to go home and just get back into the routine of life. I would really encourage you, even as you go back and look over your notes, there were several places where Larry gave us some homework to write this down, or what are you thinking about doing this week? I would really encourage you to either individually or even better with your spouse to say, let's go back and put in some of the answers to those questions so that we can see traction from this seminar. Also, this is going to be recorded. Thank you to KZoom for being here, recording this. This is going to be online. You may not have been able to be at every session. I have most of your guys' email. Once this is put online, I'm going to send out a link so that if you want to go back and review, or if you want to go back and see some sessions, there are some people that just registered this morning, and so I don't have your email. If you'd like me to give you the link, come and see me, and I'd be glad to jot down your email, and I'll add you to that list. And then lastly, Abby, Aaron, all the people that it takes more than just a pastor to put on this seminar. So thank you for the people that were behind the scenes. Let me pray as we close out our time. And again, Larry and Gladine, they'll make themselves available. If you want to buy a book from the book table, you can do that as well. Let me pray. God, we thank you again for your glorious providence. Father, you created every day, you've ordained every day of our lives, and we thank you for creating space, creating time for us this morning and into the afternoon, Lord, to reflect on, first of all, the gospel, that we've been saved out of our sin. We've been rescued from the wrath to come. It's been poured out on Christ, and now, Lord, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. We are your children, and we are your children forever. Thank you for adopting us, redeeming us, saving us, Lord, and even how that has practical implications on our marriage, Lord. I pray, Father, that you would open our eyes to see all the more clearly the reflection of Christ in the church in our marriages, and that would gain traction, Father, that we would not only feel the burden, the call to our biblical roles, but also the privilege and joy of displaying your glory to a watching world. Father, that you might be glorified through our marriage. Father, there are different seasons of marriage even in this room. Whatever season we are in, Father, I pray that we would see your providence, that would see your kindness, your graciousness to us. And Father, as we continue to run our race together, Lord, that you would enable us, equip us for every good work, Father, that not only that we might love our spouse, but that we might bring you great glory. We thank you again for Larry. Thank you again for Gladine and coming and serving us. Lord, you've displayed your grace even today. And so we thank you and we praise you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everyone.